Look at this. This is me at Le Mans in 2022, pushing flat out in testing. Now look at this. It's me saving fuel by lifting and coasting, which you have to do at Le Mans in order to save an extra pit stop. Which do you think is faster? What if I told you it was the fuel saving lap? But how exactly do you still save fuel while still driving flat out? Let me explain. In 2022, I was racing at Le Mans, and in the first day of testing, I was really struggling with the pace. Every time I pushed hard, I kept losing the rear of the car and I could not extract lap time. So my engineer came on the radio and he says to me, Dave, you're not fast at the moment, so let's just focus on lift and coast. Because at Le Mans, if you do lift and coast, you can actually save a pit stop. Not just you can save a pit stop, but if you run the right engine mode and you do lift and coast, you can actually increase your stint by an extra lap. And every time you do that, you just open up a whole bunch of strategic options. It's one of the key things to going fast at Le Mans over a race distance. So I started to do the lift and coast. And what was surprising was the car suddenly became more drivable. And not only that, but I actually ended up going faster and actually ended up to be one of the fastest cars on track and the fastest driver in our car. And that's strange, no? Like, surely when you're lifting off the throttle halfway down the straight, you should be slower over a lap? Well, that's not always the case. When you're going flat out and you're pushing to the maximum and you flat out on the throttle and then you immediately go on the brake, the car, which is accelerating and sort of loaded up on the rear as it goes down the straight, is like this. And when you suddenly jump on the brakes, it pendulum swings very aggressively that way. And that sort of swing in transfer of weight can create instability at the rear. However, if you just do lift and coast, what happens is as the car is pressed down like this on the rear, when you lift, the car stabilizes, and then when you brake, the rear comes up much more slowly and creates a much more stable platform. Now, this doesn't apply to every single racetrack. It's very beneficial at tracks like Spa and Le Mans and so on. But when you nail it, you can actually go just as fast when you're doing lift and coast as you would when you're going flat out, with the benefit of saving fuel. I'm going to show you the tips on what you should be doing when you're lifting and coasting and some other little things to focus on when trying to save fuel, because when this becomes more common in sim racing, you're going to potentially extend your stints and maybe even save a pit stop towards the end of a long race. Let's jump right into it. In order to do lift and coast well, there's a couple of lessons that you need to learn. It's not just a case of switching on lift and coast and off you go. There's some things you have to stick to. And I'm going to demonstrate them in turn 5. So the first thing that you need to do when you're practicing lifting and coasting is you need to have clear and well-defined reference points. This is rule number 2 in my fundamentals of driving, and it applies to lift and coast as well. Usually when we are driving flat out, we're braking at the curb of turn 5 at Spa. But for lift and coast, we're going to lift at the 200. So our new reference point is not the braking point, it's the lift point. That's our first reference point, and that's on the left-hand side, the 200 board. From there, we come off the throttle and we coast until we go past our regular braking point. And then we brake like 10 or 20 meters after the curb instead of braking at the curb. That's because we're approaching the corner at a slower speed. But now the key thing with lift and coast is not to drive slowly. You still have to carry a lot of speed through the corners. Your same racing speed that you did before, it's just your throttle and brake application is different. So through 5, 6, and 7, the apex speeds, you're trying to maintain the same apex speeds as you did before. Now we're going to roll down the hill, and usually we would brake at the start of the curb for turn 8. But here we come off the throttle before the 100 board, and we're going to brake just after the curb. So here we'll brake just after the curb, we'll come in and we'll either do a V line, or usually with a front wheel drive, front engine car, you hold a tighter line. This sequence here is a bit more complicated. You're going to short shift to 3rd gear, and because you're in a higher gear, you can actually lift off the power earlier and roll down the hill through the apex without losing too much time. So in that corner there, even though there's no braking, you can still do a lift and coast. The next thing that you want to keep in mind when you're doing lift and coast is you don't rev the car out. At the end of the day, we're trying to save fuel. So we're trying to steal lap time from areas where it's not as detrimental to the ultimate outcome of your lap. Okay, One of those ways is you lifting, rolling the speed into the corner and braking later while still carrying the same apex speed. But the other one is simply short shifting without revving out the car too high. So if you see your rev lights flashing, like here, so there the rev lights were flashing, that's not good for your fuel saving. If you want to really save fuel and maximize, short shift just ever so slightly. So in this car, I would change just before it switches to yellow or just as it switches on yellow. So there, I'm just short shifting the whole way through. You'll be surprised how little time you lose by just short shifting. So keep that in mind. Finally, again, let's get to the final braking point on the track. Here, you would probably lift at this Avis board and coast, and then brake just before the curb starts. Whereas without lifting coast, you'd be braking at one of those Avis boards, braking on the limits, coming off the throttle and immediately onto the brakes as quickly as you can. And lastly, if we just go back into turn 1, I'm probably going to be lifting at the 150 board. So I'm just going to slow down here. You'll see that there's two reference points. There's the 100 and there's the 150. When you're driving flat out, you're focused on the 100 and that's where you're going to brake. But when you're lifting and coasting, you need to focus on the 150 because that's where you're going to get off the throttle. That's your first action before the corner. Doing this flat out lap will be a good reference for determining how much speed we're carrying through the corners, even when we're doing lift and coast.
So to prove that you don't have to lose lap time when doing lift and coast, I'm going to drive flat out and then I'm going to do another lap while trying to save fuel, and then we can compare the time difference.
Cutting the lap for 222. Not bad, not amazing, but not bad for us to use as a reference. And definitely with the standard setup and almost, I think it's got full fuel, 50% fuel. It's a good reference for us to use on the next lap for lift and coast. But before we do the lift and coast lap, I want to talk to you about some bad habits when you're trying to save fuel. The first one, and something that's a big no-no in real life and will cross over into sim racing as well when you're saving fuel, is to do a brake and throttle overlay. And that's basically when you do something like this. You brake and you still have throttle. You're basically left foot braking and using the left foot to balance the car while you're still on the throttle. It's good in sim racing, it's quite a popular maneuver, settles the rear quite well, but it consumes so much fuel in real life that the engineers basically crucify you if you are doing a big overlay. A corner like this, you can do lots of overlay where I'm like half on the throttle and on the brake as well. But you cannot do that in real life. Same here, fast corners is where it really benefits. If you need to settle the rear, you're just tapping the brake or riding the brake while still on the throttle. Big no-no. You've got to come off the throttle and then get onto the brake in order to maximize fuel saving. And the next one that you shouldn't be doing when you are desperate for fuel or trying to get your car as far as possible is revving out the car. The easiest way to fuel save before you do any braking and throttle techniques is just to simply short shift. So instead of redlining the car, you just shift a little bit earlier. In the Aston, I would shift as I see just before I see the yellow lights. In the Ferrari, it would be just before I see the red lights. And it's obviously going to differ from car to car. But short shifting is one of the best ways to save fuel. So that's a reminder, you don't want to be overlaying brake and throttle at any point, and when you can, do short shifting. Now let's try some lift and coast. The key with lift and coast is to still carry a lot of speed into the corners, but you are lifting the throttle early and you're braking a bit later. So usually you have a reference point for your braking. We're going to have to adjust the braking point, reference points, and we're going to have a new reference point which is for lifting. So we're heading down now the Kemmel Straight into turn 5, and usually we'd brake at the curb, but now we're going to lift before the curb and brake after the curb. So here I'm going to lift it around 200, and then brake just after the curb this time. So I braked about 10 meters later, holding a tight line here, and still trying to carry as much speed as I can into the corners. Braking, lifting down the hill, braking quite late into the apex. Still trying to carry as much speed as I can in the apex. And here we can also do a small lift. May have done that a bit too late. No, we still got it. And overall, we've only lost 2/10, but we've saved much more fuel. Our first attempt at this is going to be at about a second off. Let's try again, because we can get closer. Lift at 150. Then brake just after the 100. Regular apex speed on the power. Shifting just as we see the yellow lights. Eau Rouge will still be flat, because you don't use the lift and coast in areas where you can lose a lot of lap time. You mostly lift and coast in braking zones or in short straights between two corners. Same here. And then heading down to Pouan. Lifting at the curb and then carrying as much speed as we can through Pouan. Using as little brake as possible because we did our lifting, which allows, like when you're doing lifting, there's a bit of engine braking, so you are losing speed. You just got to minimize the sort of damage that does to your lap time. Carry speed through Piff Paff, short shifting in the left-hander, and then another big lift here. Again, trying to carry as much speed as we can through the apex, up over the curb, small lift through the right in Stavelot 2. Short shifting again as we see the yellow instead of shifting on the red lights. Blanchimard would still be flat even if you're doing lift and coast, and again that's because you're not trying to go through the corners slower. Lift at the Ava sign and then brake between that Ava sign and the start of the curb. And then on the power, can we stay within a second while still saving fuel?
That time was a 2:23.6.
We can. Right, now let's take a look at the data to see if we were able to save any fuel on that lap. So now we're going to jump into the data and take a look at the difference between a lift and coast lap and a flat out lap. These laps were done on full fuel and with the default setup, and it was just a demonstration to show you that you can still drive respectable lap times around any track and save fuel without losing too much lap time. So my flat out lap was a 222.5 around Spa, and the fuel consumed was 3.45 liters. My lift and coast lap, and this is without any optimization, this is a little bit of practice and we could go much further, we could put thousands of laps into this, was a 222.2. But the key thing is I saved 0.2 liters per lap. If we jump into the data to analyze the difference between these two laps, you'll see that at the end of each straight, it looks like I've clipped the end of the speed graph with a pair of scissors. That clipping is when I lift early, brake late. During that lifting phase, I'm saving fuel, and then I brake a little bit later because I'm approaching the corner a little bit slower and try and carry the same apex speed as I did before. A good example of this is turn 5, 6, 7 at Spa. Let's just zoom into that. We'll also get a bit of turn 8s into there. So the blue graph is the lifting lap and the yellow graph is my flat out lap. I lift early, so I'm off the throttle. If you compare my throttles on 0 and the reference lap, which is the flat out lap, is still at 100%. I lift, I coast. I brake a bit later because I'm approaching the corner slightly slower, and I'm still able to carry decent amount of apex speed through the sequence. If we then go to turn 8, and here I probably could have lifted a little bit earlier. I didn't lift perfectly on the crest. I lift off the throttle, coast down the hill, brake slightly later, and I'm still able to carry the same amount of apex speed as I did on my flat out lap. So again, this is not about driving slower. You still have to carry the same apex speed in your corners, but it is about maximizing where you can save fuel. If you look at the brake and throttle traces, again, we'll just focus on turn 5, 6, 7 at Spa. You can see how much earlier I lift off the throttle. That's the green line versus the yellow line. So on the green line, I lift much earlier, And this whole phase here is coasting until I get on the brakes, where you look at the red line. With the flat out lap, as soon as I come off the throttle, I hit the brakes. Whereas with the lift and coast lap, I come off the throttle quite a long time before and then hit the brakes. So it almost looks like I'm doing a right foot braking technique, like a very lazy one. And that's kind of what you want to see in your data. But there is one thing that sim racers do in Le Mans Ultimate that I haven't mentioned, but it's for good reason. Let me explain. In LMU, there is another way to benefit from lifting and coasting, but I don't encourage you getting used to this because I think they're going to get rid of this little feature because it's not realistic. And that is, you can use the clutch. And the clutch helps because I can keep my rolling speed high and then still try and carry speed through the corner and use less fuel. Because as I pull in the clutch, there's no rolling resistance from the engine. The problem with this one is it's not realistic. And also it's difficult to get this right. So you need quite a lot of coordination, and you also need a button clutch or a hand clutch. So I'm using a hand clutch to get this right. But it takes a lot of practice. It is more natural to do the lift and coast by just lifting off the throttle early and then braking later. When you do the hand clutch, like I'm trying to do now, you're going to have to get really good at it. And also your timing has to be pretty much on point as well. So if you hold in the clutch, and you only release the clutch after you start to touch the brake. Because if you release the clutch before that, you're going to lock the rears and get rear sliding. It takes a lot of practice to get right. And if you haven't done any practice using the clutch, you may find out that even though you can go faster with this technique, it's much more difficult to learn and apply. To get lift and coast right takes a lot of practice. But I hope that with the tips I've given you here, you'll be able to not only drive just as fast as you were before, but also save fuel. The benefits can be massive. In races where you have higher fuel consumption rates according to the server settings, or if you want to try and stretch out a lap at Le Mans, having the lift and coast technique in your toolbox is probably going to cost you or win you podiums. I hope you found that useful. I'm Coach Dave, and until the next one, catch you around the next lap. Peace.